Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my channel, Unique Sports Talk. I'm simulcasting this on my other channel, my main channel, Marriage, Politics, and Sports as well. But this is a follow up to what happened to Sherrone Moore, the ex Michigan State, I'm not Michigan State, but Michigan, University of Michigan football coach who had an inappropriate affair with his subordinate. So first, like, share, and subscribe to this channel, Unique Sports Talk. Always looking for new subscribers. I try to put a lot of the sports activity just on this channel, but I still kind of simulcast it back on my main channel. But there's so much stuff on there, um, so I have it on both. So subscribe to both. Hit the like button wherever you show up on this. Hit the like button on the way in. Give me a subscription if you want to, but hit the like button. That's the most important thing. But I want to go and let's talk about what happened to this case and the fact that this guy found himself a fantastic lawyer. You know what I'm saying? This chick is okay. But before I get the video started, I have to say, as a man, forget about race, but just as a man in our natural nature of things, at some point, we got to come to a level of discernment where you just can't dip your wick into any old woman. And one of the biggest no-nos is to have any kind of sexual encounter with one of your subordinates. I mean, it opens the door to so many negative things. And I just can't for the life of me. Maybe it's because I'm older now. Maybe if I was 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe. But in my 60s, I could say, at some point, you got to learn that I don't care how infatuated you might be with a woman as a guy. Sometimes having sex with her just ain't worth it. I mean, this brother opened up the university to millions of dollars of potential lawsuits, loses his job, loses his family, loses his dignity, almost gets jail time, and that's still not that's still on the table for some box. I mean, come on, man. At some point, as men, we got to learn how to say no. And let me tell you, I don't say this lightly because one of the biggest things a man has ever done in his life is turn down a sweet a sweet, inviting piece of ass. Many men fail at that particular choice. So he failed at it and he gave up millions of dollars. He's on trial, for heaven's sakes. You know what I'm saying? Come on. But anyway, so his disgrace was a big one. But let's see what happened to the case and if he has a way out of this thing with some dignity left, with his wife still by his side and his family still intact. So I'm just saying, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Listen, brothers. And when I say brothers, I mean men, not just black men. I mean men. At some point, you got to get to the level of sexual discernment where, getting some ass is not the primary focus of our lives. Anyway, so here goes. Let's see how this case goes. And it's just not a real long case or not. But I want to see. We're going to get a chance to hear his lawyer speak, and she found some little loopholes in his charges that the judge can't even ignore. So anyway, let's just go ahead and let's see how this plays out.
As usual during the high-stress week of the Citrus Bowl.
The relationship between the parties in a stalking allegation matters. It's not stalking if the communication has a legitimate purpose. As stated in my reply, and as what Your Honor knows, is that under recently published appellate court case in the state of Michigan, it is clear that the relationship between the parties matters. In this case, Detective Welker presented to the magistrate facts to seek an arrest warrant for Sherrone Moore on stalking charges and on home invasion with intent to stalk. In the facts that she presented to the magistrate, she left out the information that Sherrone Moore was the boss of the complainant. The complainant was the executive assistant to Sherrone Moore, who at the time was the head football coach at the University of Michigan. Why does that matter? It matters because the communications that were presented to the magistrate were 12 alleged phone calls that were unanswered. The 12 alleged phone calls were on a work day. The complainant in this case had not taken a leave of absence. She had not left her job. It was working hours, and she was the executive assistant of Sherrone Moore. Sherrone Moore was never told not to contact her for legitimate purposes. In fact, he was never told not to contact her at all, but that's not what we're here arguing right now. I'm talking about the legitimate purpose. If there are contexts for legitimate purpose, it is not harassment. As I stated a moment ago, the phone calls went unanswered. So there's no evidence as to what the intent of those phone calls were. The complainant confirmed that they were work-related. The one where it says, please answer and call when you get a chance. It's my belief that those text messages were also seen as work-relative. Those were not part of.
Well, it's your belief, but did she say that, or?
She said to the detective said, was this work-related? And she said, yes, that's work-related. They showed her the whole screenshot, and she said, are these text messages work-related? And the answer was, yes, those are work-related. And then she was asked, are there any more text messages that you haven't given me? And the answer was no. And that's all. On the police report.
Okay.
So the reason, again, to connect the dots is that there's acknowledged communication that was work-related during those days, which goes towards the phone calls. She doesn't know if they're work-related or not. We don't know if they're work-related or not. It's our position they were. It was a work day. There's no evidence to show otherwise. Because the complainant was able to distinguish between communications that were work-related. She identified the text as work-related. At the time of the swear-to, Detective Welker knew that there was an employee-employment relationship. There's quite a bit of case law where omissions are considered Frank's violations. Heidi Sharp stated that Mr. Moore had a long history of domestic violence against Shiver. Okay. Shiver herself never made those statements. She never gave that information. There is no record of any of that. There is no documentation of any of that. There is no criminal history. There's nothing to support that statement made by Heidi Sharp. Through 3 interviews, the complainant never says any of that and also doesn't support it. She was asked by Detective Welker about assaultive behavior, and she said, no, there isn't any. And Detective Welker, by submitting to the magistrate Sharp statements instead of the complainant's statements, was reckless and intentional and false.
It really isn't that it's false. It's that she may have portrayed an inaccurate context to everything that's going on.
That the judge is hooking up for the magistrate. That shit's false, man. It's false.
Omitting certain things. I don't know that that makes what she said about what Heidi Sharp said false. It's just you haven't given me everything
Right.
to give context to what she's saying, whether to ignore it or not.
Right. I guess maybe the better language would be reckless disregard, which is also part of the analysis. I think reckless disregard is more accurate. So what's the circumstantial evidence here? The circumstantial evidence here is that it was a work day. It was work hours. The employee-employer relationship was intact. There were text messages that were work-related in those time frames that these calls allegedly occurred. And it was, in terms of the dates involved, that was the week that Michigan had found out who their bowl opponent was. That Sunday night, they received their opponent. It was all hands on deck. So I believe those facts are relevant. If this were August and it was a break from the program, yeah, there could be a question. But the circumstantial facts of the timing of these calls, and remember, or not remember, but I will state that at the time these calls were made, Mr. Moore had not been told not to call her and had no idea that she had even gone and talked to general counsel. He didn't know any of that.
And taking it from the standpoint that it's like a CEO and the executive assistant to a CEO, and that is typically a very close relationship. There's a lot of communication that happens. And as I was thinking about this case, the only thing that I could sort of in my head equate it to is myself and my judicial coordinator. And that the communication that flows there is different than I have with any other employee in this court. It just is, by nature of the position.
That's right, Judge. Exactly. So you get it. Also, I appreciate the lawyer trying to, placate the judge by saying, whatever she said when she used false was a little too strong for the judge. And then she backed up with another phrase. She was just placating them because she really believes it was false. Anyway, but yeah, you get a working relationship with a subordinate that you stay in close contact with, and one thing leads to another.
If I'm correct in that, and I may or may not be, I think it's something that the court would have had to have been informed of. She has the other text messages from those 2 days, right? Somewhere she saw those, but doesn't say anything about them. Doesn't say anything about what those are. Yeah, the one that occurs after on December 10th, well, one particularly,
Yeah.
She lays out in great detail. That I have a problem with because it seems to me, if I were the magistrate, I'm getting half the story. I'm not getting the full story.
A lot of people don't realize that prior to this sexual relationship coming out, they both were brought into the office at Michigan and accused of this affair, and they both denied it. They denied it, up to the point where they couldn't deny it anymore. And she took the initiative to go and rat on this guy and said all of this stuff that the man's talking about right now. And there was some dividing point in there where she decided, okay, the gig is up. Let me go ahead and just, and I don't know if she was thinking money. I don't know if he was trying to break it off, because I did hear that he was trying to get rid of her from her position, which she probably didn't want to leave. And so she said she has nothing to lose. Let me go ahead and say, yeah, he's banging me out. That's what she was telling whoever in Michigan. Yeah, we're having an affair. And since he's the superior, and she's the subordinate, the truth of the matter is, whether she consented or not, his ass is on the line and hers isn't. To tell you the truth, hers isn't. It's almost like a statutory sexual assault kind of thing, where even if she's a grown woman, she can't really consent to this kind of affair with a superior. Because the superiors are always going to be at fault because he's the one opening up the organization to millions and millions and millions of dollars of a lawsuit. And she's somewhat protected because he's the one, or whoever's the superior, because sometimes it could be a woman. They're the ones who should know better.
I find it a problem when the court isn't given all of the information for the court to make a proper determination of probable cause. I really have a problem with that. Because quite frankly, I think that the defendant's due process rights, as well as the right of the people to be able to proceed with a validly sworn out complaint, are at jeopardy. This case brings up sort of a different issue, but brings up the issue of an omission. What is clear from this court's perspective, at least, is that an omission in certain contexts can be more damaging, more problematic, more troublesome than what might be an intentional misrepresentation. The defendant wishes this court to have an evidentiary hearing regarding the issues, but fundamentally it's focused around certain portions of the omissions and sort of the context, particularly as I gather from the defendant's argument and what has been a concern of the court is the context of the relationship. And just by way of context, in looking at the swear to by Officer Walker, what's clear, and also from the court's question, I think the parties realized where the court was going and should have. It's all set out by her attorney, Ms. Sharp. Virtually every statement is a rendition of what Ms. Sharp said to the police. It isn't until a little bit later into that swear to that you get into particular statements that are made by the complainant in this case. When one looks at the Eichler case, one of the things that realize and where the defense is heading is that the context, and I read it as broadly as the defense does, the context to stalking charge, context of that relationship is critical to an assessment of that relationship and whether or not there's this harassing behavior of stalking going on. But really, I think that the falsity really comes in the way that it was sworn at. It at worst is false and an outright lie, excuse my language in that regard, or at best, it is misleading. And particularly when it talks about the 10 to 12 phone calls. And
see, now he really has a problem with saying that somebody on his side of the aisle is lying, a magistrate or anything like that. Misleading, he can handle. Lies, he can't. But so now he's going to go back to the phone calls and the stalking charge and all this other shit. But, and I'm just going to ramble for a second. The real issue is that my man, Sherrone Moore, is in this courtroom because he lacked the discernment. He lacked the discipline. He lacked the moral fiber not to stick his wick into a subordinate, being married, being a head coach, having money. The money is important, right? Kind of, right? His wife is in his corner. He has young kids. He has all of this shit, and he's willing to give it up. Now, I listen. No, I'm not a select man, right? But I had my choice of succulent pieces of meat out there before I got married, and my wife is not that bad either. And I'm trying to stack it up and say, well, how much is a sexual night worth in your life? And at some point, maybe when you're a teenager, you don't weigh that shit at all. You just want to get laid. When you're in your 20s, it might be okay. You don't have nothing going on. You're in college, everybody's screwing each other. And when you start working, you start saying, okay, listen, I have some kind of responsibility to my job, blah, blah, blah. But when you get married and when you get the top job, and I'm talking about men, at some point, you got to say, you know what? This shit's off limits. I don't care how horny I am. This shit's off limits. Because the actual act itself, I don't give a shit who she is, will never measure up to what you might have to lose. It just won't. I don't care who she is.
And text messages, there's not one mention of the fact that those to which they could determine were work related. There's not a mention of it. That is a huge, in this court's perspective, that's a huge omission. Because immediately afterwards, again, there's like a statement from the complainant about these 12 calls, making them seem as though they are somehow related to some type of harassing behavior because there's nothing on the other side to say what it may be. And then the immediate statement afterwards is a text message that came after the incident or later on the 10th, after the issue regarding the complainant's home. Frankly, I think that was intentional. I think it was intentional to place a context without saying it. Give the court a context. If you look at the very beginning, that he's this monster, he's this person that's been doing all of these things, been harassing her for months. You lead that down into all of a sudden this day comes along or the 8th of December comes along. There are these 10 to 12 phone calls, which one might presume would be a continuation of the harassment, but we now know are not any type of harassment. And then the December 10th incident. I don't believe a lot of times in coincidence. I don't believe that things happen all the time by accident. I agree. I think that was an intentional misdirection to the court in terms of what this should look like. That doesn't mean that I would end up any place different than where the magistrate was, but the magistrate was owed the benefit of having all of that information prior to making that decision. It is, in this court's mind, a glaring omission. So for those reasons, the court, in exercising its discretion, is going to grant the motion for an evidentiary hearing in this case.
All right, so let me stop it there because I do have another video for you guys. A real short one in terms of, okay, a lot of stuff happened in between, and it's got a news report of actually what happened to the charges and where he's at right now, because they haven't had a sentencing yet, but let's just get to that next part. Okay, let's get to that next part. All right.
Top story tonight, huge twist in the case against Sherrone Moore.
The former U of M coach made a surprise move, accepting a plea deal today and then pleading no contest to 2 lesser charges. Let's go to Lauren Kostick. She's following this for us. She's live in Ann Arbor tonight. Lauren, today's hearing was delayed for hours.
It was. We're live outside the Washington County Courthouse tonight, and this is where an evidentiary hearing was scheduled to start at 11 to discuss how the arrest warrant was obtained in this case. But that was all scrapped when both parties walked in hours later saying they reached a deal. Sherrone Moore walking into court Friday hand in hand with his wife and attorney by his side. It was just a few months ago when Moore was fired from the university for an inappropriate relationship.
It's significant that his wife is still hanging in there with him, right? You get on these YouTube streets and you listen to the women talk. Oh, if he cheats on me, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, blah, blah, blah. Listen, for the most part, it's her right, a woman's right to say if you cheat on her to leave and all that. But most of the time, it's just really bullshit, if you look at his wife or most women, they very rarely be able to snatch a man with this kind of income, with this kind of shit on his, you know what I'm saying? It's not just because he dipped his wick doesn't mean you're going to leave, right? The point really is the embarrassment factor. It's not necessarily because he's a cheater. It's because the shit's embarrassing when it gets out. And this guy embarrassed her, and she's still there. Some people say Michael Jordan's first wife left him not because he was cheating, because he was doing that from the beginning. She knew the deal when she married him. She left him because the chick started calling the house. He was so sloppy with it, the chick started calling the house. Calling her up and saying, "Where's Mike? I want to talk to him." And she couldn't take that kind of shit, and I could dig it. Anyway, so this guy's wife is still with him, and you might want to ask yourself why. You women, you could tell us. I'm not going to even speculate on that part, but I think I have an idea.
Relationship with a staffer. That same day, he was arrested for allegedly breaking into that staffer's home and threatening to harm himself. But his defense attorney claimed important information was omitted when obtaining his arrest warrant. That's what led to today's hearing, where we expected to hear from key witnesses in the case, including the staffer he was allegedly having a relationship with. So here's how his plea deal breaks down. Moore was originally charged with felony third-degree home invasion and 2 misdemeanor charges, stalking and breaking and entering. In the deal, all 3 of those were dismissed. Instead, he pleaded no contest to 2 new charges, malicious use of telecommunications device and trespassing, which are both misdemeanors. Take a listen.
To the charge of malicious use of telecommunications device, how do you plead?
No contest.
To the charge of trespass, how do you plead?
No contest.
Now, you understand that by pleading no contest, you'll not have a trial of any kind.
Yes, sir.
The dismissal of those charges validates the concerns we raised about the investigation from the very beginning. Mr. Moore is pleased to put this behind him and move forward.
We also spoke to the prosecutor's office. They sent us a statement saying that this plea agreement was thoroughly reviewed and that they hope this will allow the victim an opportunity to heal and move forward. Moore's sentencing is scheduled for April 14th. Live in Ann Arbor, Lauren Kostick.
Okay, so in April 14th, there's going to probably be another follow-up. He needs to give a big tip to his lawyer. I don't know what this misuse of telecommunication bullshit charge is, but it's a misdemeanor. And the other one for trespassing, the truth of the matter is people don't realize he already had a key to the house, even though it might have belonged or he might have been paying for it for the defendant or whatever. He already had a key. So it wasn't like he had to break down the windows and doors and all that shit to get in. So anyway, I don't know what kind of sentence they're going to give him. Is he going to do some jail time? Who knows? Well, we'll see. I doubt it, but we'll see. Anyway, I just wanted to throw this out at you to kind of follow up on what I put out there a couple of months ago. You can go back on both channels and see what I put out when he first got charged and the disgrace he was under and the way this thing was portrayed. And to tell you the truth, no matter what, the dude is wrong, man. He brought all this shit on himself because he couldn't, he couldn't control himself. Now, he's in a great company with some really great men who can handle their sexual appetites, up to and including King David, right? So anyway, with that, are paying, Unique Sports Talk, a simulcast on marriage, politics, and sports as well. Have a good, what's today, Tuesday? Over and out. And God bless America.